Originally from the Michiana area, author Megan Church writes to explore the truths and nuances of who we are. Her recently released novel, The Last Carolina Girl, is inspired by the author's own family history, and she is joining us this morning. Megan, thank you so much for being with us here on Hometown Living.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
You are originally from our area. We love being able to feature people who have really used their own stories to then create stories for everyone else. But tell us a little bit about your background growing up here right in the Michiana area.
Yeah, so I was born in Plymouth and I grew up in basically a cornfield halfway between Plymouth and Bremen. And I attended LaVille all through kindergarten to senior year. And from there, I went on to study at IUSB and I worked at the South Bend Tribune. I worked at a local church there in South Bend and then an ad agency in Mishawaka. So I was around the South Bend area up until 2015 when my family moved south here to Matthews, North Carolina.
So you really are from our area. I know that you kind of mentioned growing up near cornfields. I'm going, oh, how many of us can relate to that shared experience right here in the Michiana area? Well, with your debut novel, I'm sure that, we'll get to talk a little bit more about the plot and the inspiration behind this particular book a little later this morning. But, how did growing up here, immersed in the cornfields, your education that you received right here in our area really inspired your journey as an author and storyteller?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And honestly, I owe a lot of my creativity to a lot of boredom during childhood. Growing up in the middle of a cornfield where my grandparents were our closest neighbors, I basically had to entertain myself a lot. And I think that that was really great because it gave me time to explore. It taught me how to observe. And, I also had so many teachers along the way through high school, through college, and everything that really just poured into my creativity and just really launched me into the writer that I am today.
Really utilizing the inspiration around you, so many really fantastic educators. So really, how have you used that, transferring from the Midwest to where you are now geographically also inspires your latest debut novel. How are you using these locations to really come full circle for your journey as a storyteller?
Yeah. So, when I first started writing the book, I thought that it would be set in Indiana because it was the landscape that I knew so well. But I quickly learned the history of North Carolina and realized that that was essential to this book in particular. And it was those observational skills that I think came in key because I was a little nervous about writing this North Carolina setting, being new to it, but moving here and just seeing all of the beauty, the landscape that exists here. We have the coastline on the east and the mountains to the west, and in the middle is just Piedmont filled with green canopy, and it's so beautiful. And so again, just using those observational skills, I was just able to see this new landscape in a way that I no longer saw Indiana because I was so familiar with it, and that really allowed nature and the setting to become so much of an integral part, really almost a character in The Last Carolina Girl.
Earlier, you shared a little bit about your background growing up in the Michiana area, and there is a specific plot point that you really dive into that affected your family. Let's dive in, and how did that rabbit hole, as you've described it, really create the storyline of The Last Carolina Girl?
Yeah, so The Last Carolina Girl is historical fiction set in 1935 in North Carolina. And the backdrop of the story is the recently formed eugenics movement, where states could legally force sterilize individuals for what eugenicists considered the betterment of society. Now, this is the first historical fiction that I had actually written, and I was a little hesitant to have to dive into something that required so much research. But when I learned a fact about my family, I really couldn't avoid this story. So I had a great Aunt Virginia who was born in Indiana in 1919, and she was sent to an orphanage around the age of 5. And then sometime around adolescence, she was removed from her foster family and placed in a facility that was also a school. And they labeled her simple-minded, and they forced sterilized her before sending her back to that foster family. Now, I knew her my entire life, and I didn't learn what had happened to her until after she passed away at the age of 92. And I was just astonished. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't make sense of it. How could something like this happen to Aunt Virginia or anybody? And so I began researching eugenics and forced sterilization in our nation's history with all of that. And it really did lead me down a rabbit hole of research. And this character, Leah, her voice just came to me, and I knew it was a story I had to tell. And I knew that it was more research that I needed to dig in to better understand it.
Well, that historical occurrence impacted your family personally. You know, there are a lot of themes that can be related to whoever is reading this book, that theme of strength, the place that we call home. You know, what would be the biggest takeaway that you would hope a reader would see when they're looking at this character of Leah?
Yeah. So Leah really is, she's 14 years old when most of the story occurs. She's 13 at the very beginning. But she is somebody who within society in that time period had really no autonomy or voice. And so it's a question of, can somebody in that position, can somebody on the outskirts of society really fight for the future she wants? And so there are, you know, a lot of different themes that readers can pick up on in the book. But what I really hope that they're left with is this hope and strength and the ability to fight for that future that you want.
Even at the very beginning of the story, discussing in a school class setting this idea that we all have experienced of what does my life look like in the future, and having her dreams diminished even in that moment. I know I have my hands on a copy. I've been able to dive in, and I'm so grateful to have been able to talk to you more about this morning and share that connection of you being a part of the Michiana community. So thanks so much for joining us this morning on Hometown Living, Megan.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
We want to make sure our viewers can get their copy themselves. Check out meganchurch.com, or you can also follow Megan on Facebook and Instagram as well.